Hello and welcome to MRCPsych on the Go Revision Essentials. My name is Dr. Alapasurlicker and I'm a psychiatry trainee in the west of Scotland. Like many of you, I spent a lot of time commuting. This was valuable time that I could have spent revising for the MRCPsych examination. And so, I've started this podcast to help you revise on the go. Each episode breaks down one high-yield topic mapped to the syllabus. This is then followed by 5 questions to help reinforce your learning. So, grab your headphones, turn travel time into revision time, and let's get started. In episode 7, we explored perception as an active process and discussed how the brain organises auditory information using auditory scene analysis. In this episode, we will look at how perceptual abilities develop and how errors in perception can help us understand psychiatric symptoms. Let's start with a key idea. Visual perception is not fully developed at birth. Newborn infants have limited visual acuity and relatively poor depth perception. Over time, the visual system develops through interaction between neural maturation and sensory experience. This development illustrates the interaction between constitutional and environmental influences. Constitutional factors refer to biological maturation of the nervous system. Environmental influences refer to sensory experience and interaction with the world. Both are necessary for normal perceptual development. Remember, perceptual development reflects the interaction between biological maturation and environmental experience. Now, let's consider an important experiment that demonstrated this principle. One of the most famous studies of perceptual development is the visual cliff experiment. This experiment was conducted in 1960 by the psychologists Eleanor Gibson and Richard Gregory. The visual cliff was designed to investigate whether depth perception is innate or learned. The apparatus consisted of a large plexiglass table with a checkerboard pattern placed directly beneath the glass on one side, creating a shallow side, and the same checkerboard pattern placed on the floor beneath the glass on the other side, creating the illusion of a drop of around 3 feet. Although the surface was completely safe, the arrangement created the appearance of a sudden drop. In the study, 36 infants aged 6 to 14 months were placed on the central platform while their caregivers encouraged them to crawl toward them. Most infants refused to crawl across the apparent drop. Many hesitated, cried, or moved away from the deep side. Only 3 of the 36 infants crossed the visual cliff. These results suggested that infants who are able to crawl already possess depth perception. However, experience also appears to play a role. Infants who had been crawling for longer were more likely to avoid the cliff than younger infants who had only recently begun to crawl. This suggests that independent movement helps infants learn about the dangers of height. Interestingly, similar experiments were conducted with animals. Species such as chicks, goats and lambs, which are able to walk soon after birth, almost always avoided the deep side of the cliff. This suggests that depth perception develops very rapidly in species that must move independently shortly after birth. Remember, the visual cliff experiment demonstrated that depth perception emerges early in development and reflects interaction between biological maturation and environmental experience. Now, let's consider perceptual errors. Illusions occur when real sensory stimuli are misinterpreted. The stimulus is present, but the brain interprets it incorrectly. Illusions often occur because the brain applies its usual perceptual rules, such as size constancy or contextual interpretation. In most situations, These rules allow perception to operate efficiently. However, when sensory information is ambiguous or misleading, they can lead to incorrect interpretations. One influential explanation of visual illusions was proposed by the British psychologist Richard Gregory. Gregory was a leading researcher in visual perception and developed what is known as the constructivist theory of perception. According to this theory, perception does not simply record the world. Instead, the brain actively constructs a representation of reality by making perceptual hypotheses or best guesses based on past experience. The brain continuously predicts what sensory information should represent and then updates these predictions based on incoming signals. Illusions occur when these perceptual hypotheses lead to incorrect interpretations. In other words, the brain's best guess about the world turns out to be wrong. A famous example described by Gregory is the cafe wall illusion. He first noticed this illusion in the 1970s while looking at the tiled wall of a cafe in Bristol. In this illusion, perfectly parallel horizontal lines between rows of black and white tiles appear tilted or slanted. Although the lines are actually straight, the brain misinterprets the visual pattern because of interactions between light and dark boundaries. Have a look at the cafe wall illusion and see how the lines appear to tilt. Feel free to comment and share what you thought when you first saw the illusion. And while you are there, let me know what your favourite optical illusion is. Gregory also classified visual illusions into several categories. These include ambiguities, distortions, paradoxes, and fictions. You don't really need to know the details of these categories for the examination. However, if you are curious, I will briefly explain what each of them means. Ambiguities are images that can be perceived in more than one way, such as the Necker cube. Distortions involve systematic errors in size or shape, such as the Müller-Lyer illusion. Paradoxes are impossible figures that cannot exist in three-dimensional space, such as the Penrose triangle. Fictions occur when the brain perceives objects that are not physically present, such as the Canizza triangle. Remember, according to Richard Gregory's constructivist theory, illusions occur when the brain's perceptual hypotheses incorrectly interpret real sensory information. Now, let's contrast illusions with hallucinations. Hallucinations are perceptions that occur without any external stimulus. They may occur in psychiatric conditions such as schizophrenia, severe mood disorders, and delirium. They can also occur in neurological conditions or during severe stress. As discussed in the previous episode, hallucinations may arise when internally generated experiences are misinterpreted as external sensory events. Another interesting perceptual phenomenon is pareidolia. Pareidolia occurs when vague or ambiguous stimuli are interpreted as meaningful patterns. For example, people often report seeing faces in clouds, patterns in shadows, or shapes on the surface of the moon. This occurs because the brain is highly specialized for recognizing familiar patterns, particularly faces. As a result, the brain may sometimes detect patterns that are not actually present. Remember, pareidolia occurs when ambiguous stimuli are interpreted as meaningful patterns, whereas hallucinations occur without any external stimuli. Now let's test your recall. I will read out 5 exam-style questions. After each one, I will pause for 10 seconds so you can attempt the answer before hearing the explanation. Question 1. What term describes biological influences on development? The answer is constitutional factors. Question 2. A 6-month-old infant is placed on a glass platform that appears to drop sharply on one side. The infant refuses to crawl across the apparent drop, despite encouragement from their caregiver. Which classic psychological experiment does this describe? The answer is the visual cliff experiment. Question 3. An elderly patient with delirium reports seeing insects crawling on the hospital floor. When the doctor turns on the light, the patient realises the insects were actually shadows cast by objects in the room. What type of perceptual disturbance does this represent? The answer is an illusion. Question 4. What term describes seeing meaningful patterns in ambiguous stimuli? The answer is pareidolia. Question 5. A child who has recently learned to crawl becomes increasingly cautious around staircases and edges after several weeks of independent movement. This observation best illustrates the interaction between which two influences in perceptual development. The answer is biological maturation and environmental experience. If you paused and attempted the questions, well done. Testing your recall like this is one of the most effective ways to prepare for the examination. Let's summarise what we've learnt today. Visual perception develops through interaction between biological maturation and environmental experience. The visual cliff experiment by Eleanor Gibson and Richard Walk demonstrated that depth perception develops early in infancy but is influenced by experience. Illusions occur when real sensory stimuli are misinterpreted. Hallucinations occur when perception arises without an external stimulus. Phenomena such as pareidolia illustrate how the brain actively constructs perception based on expectations and prior knowledge. Together, these concepts explain how visual perception develops through the interaction of biological maturation and experience, and why the brain can sometimes misinterpret sensory information, leading to illusions and other perceptual phenomena. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of MRCPsych on the Go Revision Essentials. I hope this episode helped to move your revision forward. If you have any questions or just want to continue the discussion, you can find me on LinkedIn at MRCPsych on the Go, spelled MRCPysch on the Go. This podcast is about making revision accessible. If you found it useful, liking and sharing it with others helps the goal more than anything else. That's it for today. I'm Dr. Alapas Ehrlicher, and as always, keep revising on the go.